Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today we'll talk about Pennsylvania's election law. But first, we're joined by Burwood Yost, director of the Floyd Institute of Public Opinion at Franklin and Marshall College. Now, we'll go over some specific poll data in just a moment, but are there any significant trends that you've noticed as you've been polling throughout the year?
Good morning, Francine. Well, look, I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is how much this race has changed since Kamala Harris has entered it. The basic sentiment on the ground, things people care about, like the economy, which remains the top issue, or their assessment of the personal finances, the direction of the state, those things have stayed pretty consistent and they're pessimistic. But some of the future-looking attributes that we track in the poll are looking more optimistic. And I think part of that has to do with the entry of Kamala Harris into the race. President Biden was clearly losing this state and losing by a pretty significant margin in ways that could have, I think, endangered some congressional candidates in his party and even state house candidates down the ballot. And so, one of the things that I'm struck by is how much the dynamics of this race has changed and how much more energized particularly Democrats are about their candidate.
Let's start off by looking at the most important issue facing Pennsylvania. As you mentioned, 28% claim the economy. Government comes in at 9%, taxes at 7%, education at 6%. Has there been much fluctuation on this issue, or has this been constant throughout the year?
Yeah, for the most part, concerns about the economy have been the top issue for the past several years. There's always concern about government and politicians and the way that government addresses problems that people want to see solved. But the reality is that number has faded a little bit. At the same time, the economy has maintained its lead in this particular question.
The next question, how are you getting along financially? 14% say better off, 46% say worse off, 40% about the same. Do you notice that's a correlation between how people feel about their personal finances and those that are claiming the economy being their biggest concern?
Yeah, there's no question, Francine, that the economy is a key issue in this election. Most of the people who say they are voting for President Trump say the economy is the reason that they're voting for him. The same is true in the Senate race. Dave McCormick's supporters often point to the economy and economic policies as the reasons that they're supporting his candidacy. So the economy, concerns about the economy, concerns about personal finances, those things are all related to vote choice. That said, there are a lot of Democrats who say they're worse off financially than they were a year ago. So this isn't purely partisan assessments of the economy. It is also something that Democrats and independents rate negatively, and I think has impacted this race in significant ways.
The next question asks, will you vote in the election? 92% say certain to vote, will probably vote 4%, 50-50 chance 2%, and 2% say they do not think they will vote. How important is voter turnout in determining who ultimately wins the presidential race?
Yeah, look, one of the things that we note in our poll release is how the composition of the electorate is going to be so important. When you look at for instance, the presidential race, and you look at people who frequently vote, people who voted in 4 or 5 of the last general elections, Kamala Harris has a larger advantage. But when you look at those voters who are less frequent voters, who voted less than that, former President Trump has a lead. So there's no doubt in my mind that the composition of the electorate, the turnout, and the partisan nature of that turnout is going to explain who wins ultimately.
Let's look at the presidential race right now. Harris is coming in at 49%, Trump at 45%. Jill Stein at 1%, Chase Oliver at 1%, someone else at 1%, and 3% for don't know. Now, Robert Kennedy Jr. dropped out of the race earlier this fall. What happened to those who planned to vote for him initially?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're not 100% sure, but we have seen both candidates as the campaign progressed. The number of undecided voters is starting to go down a little bit. So certainly some of them have gone to President Trump. Some of them are still undecided. Some of them probably won't vote. because they don't have a candidate that appeals to them. This race is really close. Actually, if you include the people who at first say they're undecided and lean toward a candidate, the race is 49-46, well within the margin of error. And so neither candidate's at 50% yet. That's important. That means there's still a pool of voters that are going to decide this race. Many of them are independent voters. Probably 10% of the state's electorate are truly independent. They are the ones that the largest portion of them are still thinking about who they're going to vote for, who could still change their minds. And I think ultimately that's what decides this election.
Let's move ahead now and look at two back-to-back. First of all, the decision to vote for Donald Trump. 73% are voting for Trump, 27% against Harris. And then the second question, decision to vote for Kamala Harris. 56% are voting for Harris, 41% against Trump, 3% don't know. Can you talk a little bit about what you gather from this data? Does this perhaps suggest that Donald Trump is a more polarizing candidate?
Well, the reason we asked that was because in 2020, we asked that question frequently. And when you got almost the same numbers for Donald Trump. I mean, his supporters were avidly in his camp. But what you saw for President Biden was that a majority of the people who said they were voting for him said they were voting actually against Trump. And so this is a turnaround from 2020, that the Democratic candidate isn't just fooling people who don't want to see Trump elected to office again, but that genuinely want to see her win. And that's one of the important things in the poll. We show some numbers that the Democrats and Republicans are equally motivated to support their candidate. That wasn't true in late June, early July, after the debate performance between Trump and Biden. It is true now.
The next question asks, are you certain you will vote for the presidential candidate you selected in this poll? 93% say certain, 7% are still making up their mind. How do you determine who remains undecided at this point?
Well, there's a bunch of ways to do it. A small number of people just say, I don't know who I'm voting for. But we include that proportion of people who say, well, I could change my mind, as one subset of undecided voters. Many of them will probably end up voting the way they're leaning at the moment. But it's important to understand that these voters could change their minds. There's things that could affect them. There's still, lots of advertising, lots of campaign events, lots of things that could happen between now and Election Day. And I think those voters, they still have a choice to make. Some of them probably won't vote, but ultimately they're going to be the ones who decide the election. We know that practically 90% of Democrats and 90% of Republicans are voting for Harris, depending on their party. So it is really these folks that are still thinking about it that will tilt this race one way or the other.
Let's take a look at the U.S. Senate race now. Bob Casey, the incumbent, is coming in at 48%. Dave McCormick, 39%. Other 3%, and 10% remain undecided. Is this consistent with what you've seen in this race over the month, or have you seen it trending in any direction?
Yeah. Again, Francine, if you add in the leaners, this is about an 8-point race, 48-40. And that's closer than it's been in our polling. McCormick seems to be making some gains. It's interesting, though. At the same time, he's making some gains because primarily more Republicans say they're supporting his candidacy. His favorability ratings have become more negative. And so some of the advertising I think the Casey campaign has put out about him has affected his personal popularity. At this point, Casey has an advantage because more Democrats are supporting him than Republicans are supporting McCormick. I fully expect those Republicans who are sort of on the fence, most of them to come back to McCormick. So I'm prepared for that race to get even closer than it is now.
Let's look at one last question. How is U.S. Senator Bob Casey handling his job? 15% say excellent, 22% good, 21% fair, 27% poor, and 15% don't know. Now, per the prior question, Bob Casey's pulling 9 points ahead of his opponent. However, 38% ranked his job approval as fair or poor. Can you explain that phenomenon?
Well, look, his job approval ratings are pretty close to where they were prior to his first reelection in 2012. And so, I think his numbers are They could be higher. They're not as high, as, for instance, as Governor Shapiro's are, but they're not as low as President Biden's, for instance. And so he's in a spot from which he can win re-election. I think he'd like to see those numbers increase. They were much higher in 2018, last time he ran. But in this environment, with all the advertising that's going on for other races, it can be a little difficult to break through. So I think we're just going to have to see how the advertising continues to affect the popularity of these two candidates. The truth is, Bob Casey is still viewed more favorably than unfavorably by most voters. His job approval ratings are good, not great, but he's certainly well positioned to win another term. We'll just have to see what happens in the next few weeks.
Berwood Yost, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to see you, Francine. Thanks.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break. Welcome back. We're joined today by Senator Amanda Cappelletti. We have also invited Senator Cris Dush to join this discussion as well, and we anticipate hearing from him a little bit later in the program. Senator, the state Supreme Court is again considering whether undated mail-in ballots should count. How could this impact the election politically?
I think that we're seeing two different voices when it comes to what that looks like. One is on the side of ensuring that all votes count, that everybody's voice is heard, very inclusive, ensuring that people who have the right and the privilege to vote here in Pennsylvania, that their voices are heard. And the other side is really pushing for more of a disenfranchisement mentality, saying that those ballots should not be counted despite clearly those individuals wanting to cast their vote and participate in the process.
Well, any changes to election procedure, particularly if it's within weeks or days prior to Election Day, cause further confusion or problems for voters?
Absolutely. When you see changes coming in this close to the election date, it's a big problem. All of our election workers, and they are nonpartisan, they are from all sides of the political spectrum. They have been trained, they have done all of their work to really know what to expect, anticipate, and do on election day. And when you start to throw curveballs in by changing things that are happening between now and then, it can really mess up what people should expect and anticipate, and then also mess up the continuity of what we see throughout the entire Commonwealth.
Should there be a limit or a time limit perhaps on how late you can go or how close you can get to election before making these changes?
That's a great question. I think that is something that we should work with the election boards throughout the counties to determine what's appropriate there so that they know what to expect and anticipate and how to get that information out to their workers who volunteer their time and days to be a part of this.
You serve as Democratic chair of the Senate State Government Committee. What type of election-related issues are you currently working on in that committee?
We're talking about what we can do to try and improve our electoral process, like having pre-canvassing in our counties. We know that that is something that they are really wanting, because especially in more populated counties that use mail-in balloting more frequently, and there are more people to use it, it really puts a strain on getting the information and the data out to people in a seamless and timely manner on who has won elections and what we can anticipate. So I think that's really the biggest piece right there.
Let's talk a little bit more about this. There have been calls for pre-canvassing in recent years, particularly by county governments. For those that are not familiar, can you explain what exactly is involved in pre-canvassing and how that could benefit county governments?
Sure. So there's a couple of different ways you can do pre-canvassing. Essentially, what this means is that through the mail-in balloting process, we have the actual envelope that your mail-in ballot is sent in. Then you have the secrecy envelope on the inside where your ballot is put into. And that gets mailed to your county election board office, and they're going to do their counting there. In some states, they are allowed to open the envelope and then open the secrecy envelope and then flatten everything out to get ready to go through their scanning process to count it. So those are the kind of different processes. You have opening one envelope, opening two envelopes, and being able to flatten kind of all comes into one, and then the counting process. So what this means is if we can pre-canvass, you can open at least one of those envelopes, preferably two, and really just get the paper ready to be fed through and start the counting process on election day. There are some states that even allow counting before election day. But if we do that, what that means is we're not having people go from, 7 a.m. when the polls are open all the way through, several days later, depending on how many mail-in ballots they're receiving, to get the actual count for the election and see who has won and know what the numbers are. This saves a lot of time, a lot of energy if you can just prepare, as opposed to taking election day, open, and then scan, open, and then scan.
We're going to take a very brief break. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. We've been talking about election law being considered within the Senate. We've been speaking with Senator Amanda Cappelletti. We're now also joined by Senator Cris Dush. Senator Dush, you are Majority Chair of the Senate State Government Committee. Just a moment ago, we were talking about pre-canvassing, something that particularly county governments have been calling for. Give us your perspective on pre-canvassing, and is this something you would support?
Well, I understand that the counties association has been asking for that, but as I've been talking to individual counties, they would prefer election day to be election day. I'd like us to get back to the day when we used to have just absentee ballots, and those absentee ballots went out to the precincts where they were counted and tabulated there. Then the results were brought back to the central processing at the county level. We could do that all over again with the mail-in ballots as well. And it's a little bit more work for the precinct workers, but even those, I'm talking to more and more of those as well. They have been talking with the people in their precincts over the last few years, and initially they were concerned with it, but the numbers of mail-in ballots is dropping off now. And they've been telling me that it's something that they could actually handle again. And they also say that one of the things that would help do is eliminate some of the confusion, because they know the people in their precincts. The precincts are capped at 1,200 persons per precinct, and they get to know these folks. So that when it comes to election integrity, they could take away some of the arguments about the mail-in ballots, and it would help. And we could get back to being election day again.
I'll push back a little bit. Just in that the Department of State hasn't heard anything about wanting these mail-in ballots to be sent to precincts. CCAP hasn't heard anything about it. And while some places might be seeing numbers drop in mail-in ballots, our more populated counties still have a significant number, and it would be an onerous burden on them to have the mail-in ballots sent to the precincts to get this done. And that's just not fair.
Amanda, I have to disagree, because the precincts are all capped at 1,200. And
Cris, I can tell you, in the precincts in the communities that I represent, it would be a huge burden on them, because there is still a significant number of mail-in ballots going out. Nobody's asking for this. Nobody has seen any ask for this request. And until that comes up and election boards are making their voices heard in that way, I don't think we need to push this kind of change.
Well, that's why we're not doing it this session. We're going to be doing it next session whenever I'm not interested in making changes in the last minute to these precinct workers. But the biggest applause line that we had at CCAP here 2 years ago was when I made the comment that I want election day to be election day, and that I'm willing to make it the two most expensive days in the Commonwealth. If we have to pay some additional money to have more people in the precincts and that sort of thing, so that they can get this stuff done. And that was the CCAP's general meeting. That was the biggest applause line of the whole debate that we had. There were three representatives from your party and just myself, and that the county commissioners that were in attendance. CCAP doesn't always reflect the views of its membership. I'm learning very quickly.
Let's go back and look at if I may, I'm sorry, look at the history of the pre-canvassing bill that was in the legislature earlier this spring. The bill passed the State House earlier this year in a party line vote. All Democrats in favor, all Republicans opposed, and then it stalled in the Senate. Is pre-canvassing a partisan issue?
I don't think it is. I think when you look at the states that have pre-canvassing, it is a mix between Democrat and Republican. We have Alaska, Arizona, Tennessee, Texas, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York. They all have Florida. They all have some type of pre-canvassing. I don't think it's a partisan issue overall. Unfortunately, for some reason, it may have become a partisan issue here in Pennsylvania, and I'd really like to see that change.
Well, anytime that you get the opportunity to put additional steps in a process, and that's exactly what coming in and doing the canvassing on additional days ahead of time does. You have increased opportunities for either misfeasance, malfeasance, or outright fraud. And that's just a simple processes thing. Anybody who deals with processes understands that. And my intent and I think the general consensus of the people who are opposed to this is that adding those additional steps gives added reason to be concerned about how the elections are being run. And I do not want, and the people that I know that are involved with this do not want us questioning the elections, and adding an additional step, an additional process, additional days to this actually does that. It's very simple. If we can get it done on the same day, and we can get it done with processes that have held up for well over 150 years, then we need to do it that way.
I will say, I don't think that our election workers, the Board of Elections individuals, have any malfeasance, malintent, or anything of that nature in the work that they are doing. And if they're asking to be able to pre-canvass, and they're doing it with goodwill and wanting to ensure that we get election results in a timely manner.
Well, first of all, I'm not questioning the people who are working there. What I am saying is that just like any other process system and any place where there is the potential where people see power and are seeking to do things because of that power. So there's a forensic cold case detective that money, drugs, money, sex, or power are the three motivators most common for murders and other crimes. And quite honestly, the power and stuff that is seen in political office, that is something that is a temptation for people to get involved for the wrong reasons. 99.9%, or probably even more, given the numbers that we have, is probably even greater than 99.9%. Our election workers are fantastic. The ones, especially the ones that work at the precincts. I love them. Without them, the wheels come off the bus. And neither one of us can be in office.
Senator Cappelletti, if I may, are you confident that county election staff have the resources to count and process the election results within the 20 days to be able to provide those results?
I do. I think that we have a history of getting those results the night of election night, and that people over the course of creating mail-in balloting are seeing a little bit of a difference in how fast we get our results. And that's why, pre-canvassing is being asked for, because we can get that set and done and just have it ready to start the count, and a much smoother process going into election day, and then having our results with surety at the end of election day, just like we used to.
What happens if election results aren't certified on time?
Well, there are some court cases that have to deal with that. It's probably going to end up in front of the court. But if I could go back to what was just being said, we were getting election results back when we had the telegraph, and before there were even telephones. We were getting them on election night or the following day. We are very much capable of being able to do this. The question is the process in which we do it. Getting the ballots out to the precinct or some other way, even if you're going to have a central processing facility. Center County does that. They have a central processing facility for handling the mail-in ballots. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to have a central processing facility, you can do it all in one day. I mean, it's incomprehensible to me that when people used to count ballots by hand only a few short years ago and we had the results, now that we have machines, we can't get it done in the same day. That's just ridiculous.
Senator Dush, a
So
moment
we
ago,
don't need the pre-canvassing.
you had mentioned your proposal to utilize the precincts to help count the mail-in ballots. What kind of reception have you heard both from county government officials as well as from other members of the legislature?
The legislature, it's kind of a mixed bag. Most of the people in the Republican Party are for it, but I will say that as I've been talking with precinct workers and others, and it's not just in the 7 counties that I represent, it's been in some others as well. And county commissioners, very much for this. So they would love to see it go back to where they knew that the people who know the folks who are in that precinct have an interest in or have the ballots back there, so that they know their names, they know their signatures. I mean, they can compare it, or if something's going on, they can call, that kind of thing. They're just great people.
We're going to continue.
I concur that they're great people. I have not met one person in my time that is interested in having the mail-in ballots at the precincts.
We're going to continue our discussion in just a moment, but first let's give our guests a brief break and look at some upcoming programming on PCN. We want you to meet the candidates whose names appear on the ballot in November. Our series of interviews features the hopefuls running for U.S. Senate, Congress, and state row offices. It all gets started Wednesdays at 7 p.m. To find out who's featured and what offices they're running for, visit PCN Select or PCNTV.com. Journalist Roundtable returns with Kim Lyons from the Pennsylvania Capitol Star, Julia Taruso with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Justin Schweitzer from City and State PA. That's Thursday night at 7 p.m. Our series, Battlefield Pennsylvania, explores fighting in Gettysburg, Chambersburg, Pittsburgh, and in the air on board Flight 93 for the War on Terror. It's a mini marathon of programs that starts Friday at 12:45 p.m. Find out the details for each show at PCNTV.com or PCN Select. Football game of the week here on PCN, Southern Columbia versus Danville. The action starts Friday at 7 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free online. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now let's return to our discussion with the Senate chairs of the Senate State Government Committee. We were talking about changes in election law. Senator Dush, if we can come back to you for a moment, are there standard policies for how voters can fix when there are errors on those mail-in ballots?
Everything's already been set in statute. The problem is the changes, the last minute guidances and stuff from the secretaries of state, and that's gone back over the last 6 years. Even the changes that brought in the new voting machines, that sort of thing, that's all been done by executive fiat, if you will. And now one of the things I'm not going to do is, and I've got agreement from Senate leadership on this, we're not running any new election bills for the remainder of this term. And the reason is the confusion that's being caused when the Senate or the state Supreme Court allowed the disregarding of the signature verification and dates in 2020. And then we forced them to reverse themselves. Now that Commonwealth Court got rid of the date verification again, and the Supreme Court had to chastise them and say, no, it means what it means. And then when they allowed the drop boxes, which we've shown repeatedly, and Luzerne County just saw it again and finally got rid of the drop boxes, those things were all done by either judicial or executive fiat. There's a reason why we go through the legislative process when it comes to setting policy and dictating the procedures to the extent that we do in the legislature. It's because we can hammer this stuff out back and forth and run through a bunch of scenarios. When the court is dealing with something, they're dealing with a specific case in front of them, and for them to turn around and make policy, they don't get the opportunity to do that. And that's why, with Article 2 is the legislature, Article 3 is the law, then Articles 4 and 5 are the executive and judicial branches. They are literally and figuratively in accordance with first principles. They are under the law. They do not have the ability of the sovereigns to change the law. The people of this Commonwealth are the sovereigns, and the legislative body are their rules committee, selected out of themselves. That process is being turned on its head, and I'm not going to add to the confusion with new legislation right now, but we are definitely monitoring to see what the courts and the Secretary of State are planning on doing, because that confusion is what's really caused all the angst that's going on here right now.
So I appreciate that the majority leadership and that my colleague here, Cris, is really interested not pushing anything right now because of the possibility for confusion, and in a variety of ways, not just because of the court systems, but because, as we mentioned earlier, when we make changes this close to an election, it really does just cause a lot of confusion for people and our poll workers and our election boards. So I do truly appreciate that. But I do want to kind of push back on the judicial piece of this, only because I have a slightly different perspective than my colleague in that I'm a BARD attorney, right? And the court's job is to interpret the laws. And if we don't write those laws clearly, they've got to do the best that they can do with the way we've written the laws. And I think that the courts have been doing the best that they can. To do that. I don't think it has to do with the way one thing is written over another and the fact that the judicial system or anything else is under the legislative branch in the Constitution. We can agree to disagree on whether there was intent in the way that piece was written and what that looks like, but I think our courts are trying to do the best, and really what we should take away is that we need to clarify some of these things and write a law that is clearer. We are seeing one of the things I really do stand up for as a senator is when we pass a law, when we see it come back through and we're seeing the implementation, being willing to go back and make changes because we're seeing it's not being implemented in the way that we envisioned it or in a way that actually helps people. So for me, I'm seeing this as we need to go back and make these clarifications because it's not clear in what we had before. It's not being implemented in the way that it was before. And to go back to your original question, I encourage people to use the Department of State's website for as much information as they can when it comes to voting and clarity and what they need to be doing to ensure that their vote is counted.
Do voters have any recourse if they suspect that their vote is not going to be counted? Can they file a provisional ballot, or do they have any other options?
Yeah, there's provisional ballots available for the individuals at the precincts. Whether it's they come in and they're being told that they've already voted. Well, no, I haven't. Well, you can do a provisional ballot, and then your signature will be compared to the signature that came in on the mail-in ballot. There are a number of ways, but yes, one can get a provisional ballot, even if you don't appear on the voting rolls. That was another thing that arose here recently that the court just decided on. An individual was living at one location. He was having a home built, and his renewal for his motor vehicle, his car came in, and he registered the vehicle at another location. And this is another example where the executive didn't think all of this out. Is that automatic voter registration thing? It shifted his voter registration to the new address, and he was no longer registered within his precinct. He was allowed to fill out a provisional ballot, and that was a court case that just got settled by the Supreme Court. And again, finally, Justice Wecht made the point. He said, we have to decide whether the election code means exactly what it says. And I have to agree with him. When the language is plain, and it has been plain, and it's upheld for decades, then because that the signature verification and date, that goes back almost to the Civil War with the absentee ballots. There's no reason to interpret it in any other way than that it is a requirement, and yet the courts managed to do that.
The signature verification piece does count. I think the question is more about the date and whether or not people have dated their ballots. I could be incorrect there, but I think that's the real question. People are getting their signatures verified. I don't want the public to think that signature verification isn't happening in our precincts.
Well, it's also on that dating aspect. The U.S. federal law requires the ballots to be kept for 22 months. And the purpose for that is as evidence in case there's a question about the ballots. Chain of custody is something, as an attorney, you know, and every judge that I've talked to knows that if it's not done properly, which includes signatures and dates, so that they can be checked in a court case. They've thrown repeatedly cases out if the signature verification and the dates, if the signatures and dates don't match up. And as I made the comments when the court was getting ready to reverse itself in November of it was 2 years ago, I said, if you stick with that ruling that you made in September 2020, then you better be prepared for everybody who had their cases thrown out or the evidence thrown out for lack of signatures and dates. Then all those criminal and civil cases, they're going to be asking to reconsider them. And the court did reverse itself. And again, the Commonwealth Court, for some reason, last month decided, nah, the dates don't matter. The Supreme Court came back and chastised and said, yeah, they do matter. And that's why they are evidence, and you have to have chain of custody on evidence.
Not opposed to everything being dated. I'm simply hoping that people understand that it's not the signature that's not being verified. And the thing to know is if the date is somehow messed up, and some people do mess that up and put the wrong date there for a variety of reasons. And we have the Department of State that has put in there a 20 and a blank spot so people realize it's the current date and not a date of birth when they're signing that. That ballot very clearly was only printed at a certain time and to be used during a certain time. So I think the question of the dating of all of this is, to a point understandable, but it is also very, very clear and understandable that individuals have messed that up. But this was meant for this time frame because it was only printed in this time frame, and then it was postmarked at this date, or they have placed it in a Dropbox on this date. So I think that those things are just really important to keep in mind, and that the citizens of this Commonwealth understand that signatures are verified when it comes to voting.
Let's shift our focus. The Freedom Caucus had applauded Auditor General Tim DeFore's announcement that his agency was going to look over the statewide motor voter program. Were there specific concerns that you're hoping that they look into as they conduct this audit?
Just to make sure that we're doing things within the law. That's the main thing. For me, it's all about following the rules of the game.
Now, Senator Dush, a moment ago, you had referred to the automatic voter registration. Could you explain briefly what the difference is between what the Shapiro administration had announced in the past year regarding automatic voter registration as opposed to motor voter?
Sure. Voters typically under motor voter, they come in, they get their driver's license or whatever, and then they were asked a question, do you want to register to vote? We had some problems in 2017 that Al Schmidt brought actually before us while he was commissioner in Philadelphia, of that screen coming up before the question about whether you were a U.S. citizen or not. And then when what was happening there is they were still being allowed to register to vote. They should never have seen that screen. But what the Governor Shapiro said or did was he had the Department of Transportation, instead of do you want to vote, it says you will be registered to vote. And that's compelling people to do something. The only people that have the authority to issue rules and laws that can compel somebody to do something or not to do something, that has to come from the legislature. And that was a usurpation of our duties and responsibilities in the legislature. And now we're seeing the results of it. Again, it's not a well thought out process. This is why we had that something like that guy ended up not having the ability to, well, he had to file provisional and was allowed to vote. but he shouldn't have to go through that. And that was done because, again, there was no debate over the way it was to be done. It was just something, an edict, again, that came from the executive.
So it is a well thought out process, if you ask me. PennDOT has a very robust system for verifying an individual's both citizenship status as well as their age in order to get a driver's license, a permit, an ID, all of those things. You have to provide very specific identification documents, either from the Commonwealth for your age or from the Department of Homeland Security. So when they're going through that and applying for these systems, individuals are then marked appropriately either as non-citizens or underage, so that when they're going through that process, they're not automatically registered to vote. It's only for those of us who have the marking to say that we are citizens, that have provided those documents, that we are of age, we've provided those documents, are automatically registered. And there is nothing within the law that says that the governor can't take that stance. And there are plenty of other states and commonwealths that have done this type of programming. And I'm excited to see this because we've seen an uptick in registration and an uptick in the participation of our electoral process. And that is so critical at a time when I think we're really fraught with trying to figure out what direction we're taking the country and how we're doing that. So I'm excited to see it. I think it's a well thought out process, and it'll be interesting to see how it continues to play out as it's moving forward.
Look, my side, the Republican Party is getting more registered votes through this process than the Democrats. I don't care about that. This isn't a partisan issue. What gets me and what should get every citizen in the Commonwealth is when the executive branch does something that compels people to do something, compels them. They don't have the authority to do that. That is a legislative issue. And the fact that they did that and have gone beyond their powers and just assumed that they could do it without authority, that's a problem. And I'm not going to back off on it, even if it benefits my party. That's not the point. The point is it has to be something that the people agree to and their legislative body agrees to. These places where it's been done in other states, that's been done through the legislative process. It has not been by executive edict. Governor Shapiro is acting like a dictator in this.
So I'm going to push back. He's not acting like a dictator, and nobody is compelled to do anything. He simply moved from an opt-in process to an opt-out process. You do not have to register to vote when you're doing this. It is just, you have to say, no, I do not want to register as a voter at this address or at this place. It's not compelling anybody. He's not a dictator. And I find it offensive that you'd say he's a dictator at this day and age and all of the things that are going on globally. You might not agree with his policies, and I certainly understand that. You and I have plenty of disagreements, even though we agree on plenty of other things. I don't think it's appropriate to take it that step as our governor.
Look, I'm not going to back off on this. He is taking action that is he doesn't have the authority to do. That's what dictators do. And I will tell you this, when you say you will be registered, you will comply, that's exactly what he's doing. And when the people who have ended up getting registered, not knowing that they and feeling, this is the one thing that gets me. There are people who have gone in there that have never had any desire to vote. That's their right. But when the government tells you you will be registered, the IRS is more feared than death. And it's because when you get those letters, you feel you got the weight of government coming down on your shoulders. And when the government's telling you you will be registered, they have that weight on their shoulders. That force that in law enforcement, just the mere presence of an officer is considered part of the use of force continuum. He's using the force of government, and he knew what he was doing because I called him out on it, and they still implemented it. He's using the force of government to compel people to vote and to register. And he doesn't have the authority to do that. And we've never given him the authority to do that. There's no authority under the Constitution for him to create that kind of law. And it's not even a law, but using the government to do something that acts like it is the force of law when it's not.
Look, if he doesn't have the authority to do so, the courts will tell us as such, and thus far, they haven't told us as such. In fact, the program continues to run quite well, and I think that thinking that people are fearful of seeing, oh, you're being registered to vote, would you like to opt out of registering to vote, is underestimating the intelligence and the fortitude of Pennsylvania citizens all throughout this Commonwealth. They have the ability, they are smart, knowledgeable people, and they can click that button.
I'm going to jump in because we are just about near the end of our program. I'm going to give each of you a moment to respond. Now, you both mentioned you're not going to take up any additional election-related legislation this session because we're so close to Election Day, roughly 6 weeks away. What would you like to take up perhaps in the future session, perhaps in the winter? Senator Dush will give you the first option. Go ahead.
Well, the list is long. Properly verifying voter registrations. There are still ongoing court cases and new court cases coming up about people who are registered. In fact, we had a guy kicked off of the voter list in Center County because he didn't exist, and now he's back 2 years later with a new name or same name. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but voter registration is another issue. The processes, I do want to see the precincts get the mail-in ballots so that we can have it be Election Day rather than election week. I'll leave it with those two. I know we are getting short, but there are going to be a number of them we're going to be addressing next year.
Senator Cappelletti, you get the last word.
Thank you. I think you've seen today that both my colleague and I are truly passionate about some of these issues. We have some differing perspectives. We do try to work to find compromise where we can and do things together. I want the citizens of the Commonwealth to know that despite the bit of sparring you might see today, the two things that I'll put out there then is you've heard me talk about pre-canvassing. I'm going to continue to push and advocate for pre-canvassing. I understand my colleague here is not keen on the idea, but I'm going to continue to do what I can to advance that issue. The other thing that I will say is I'd really like to see us be able to more fully implement ERIC to clean up our voter rolls. I think that there is legitimate concern on how long it takes for names to be removed from our voter rolls and that entire process. We've heard the Department of State and the Secretary of State tell us that it can be up to 7 years depending on where we are in that process and how somebody has voted. It looks very different each time, and I think that is a legitimate concern, and I'd like us to be able to fully utilize the resources we have access to do that.
Senator Amanda Cappelletti, Senator Cris Dush, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
PCN spoke with Senator Rosemary Brown about her bill to provide Alzheimer's disease advocacy and funding.
We are joined today by Senator Rosemary Brown. You are proposing a bill to establish Alzheimer's committee and a division inside the Pennsylvania Department of Aging. What are the goals of this division and committee?
It's a great goal. It is Senate Bill 840. It is creating an Alzheimer's disease and related disorder division within the Department of Aging. And within that division, once we establish that, we will establish a committee, an advisory committee that will really hone down and narrow into the details of Alzheimer's disease and dementia-related disorders that can really help Pennsylvanians. This is a significant step towards a very serious disease state.
What do you hope that this division and committee will bring to the Department of Aging? Do they have any Alzheimer's plans or committees so far, or is this brand new?
Yeah, this is pretty new, but I think, back in the day, Governor Corbett established a state plan. I think it was back in 2013, and pieces of that were taken in, and other pieces were sort of, set aside, and nothing was done. I think Secretary Kavulich has done a great job with trying to create more of a plan here and trying to look forward. And I worked with the Secretary of Aging, with the Alzheimer's Association, and the administration on this initiative because it was something that was really important to establish. So This is fairly new. This is something that has been on the back burner and something that has been needed. And it's finally taking movement, which is very nice. So it is in committee right now over in the House, and we hope to see that get onto the governor's desk before the end of this session and go into law.
What inspired you to pass this bill?
This was a great initiative that the Alzheimer's Association came to me on and discussed with me the importance of it. And of course, in my district, constantly running into people and families, even before I was a legislator, knowing people that have gone through Alzheimer's and dementia illness in their family. It is extremely tough, not only for the patient, but for the families, the friends, everyone surrounding the disease state. So the caregiver model of it, the difficulty in finding resources, knowing what to do, how to do it the best that you can, how to stop the progression the best that you can. There's so much information out there, but it's all over and it's in silos. So we're really trying to put this all together. And the Alzheimer's Association and their advocates came to me to discuss this. I absolutely wholeheartedly agreed. And then from that point, we went forward and was working with the secretary and the administration as well.
You mentioned that this bill has passed the Senate and is now in the House. Have you heard anything from any of the representatives in the House on their thoughts on this bill at all?
Yeah, I have heard nothing but positive. I have heard nothing but this is great. This is a wonderful measure to move forward. And so sometimes it's just the nature of timing and the push. And I think the advocates have been very strong in saying, you know, to get this over the finish line. One thing I think that we set up very strongly, the Senate did, was put $1.9 billion in the state budget for this division, and we made sure that was in there. And so this way we can move forward with the parameters of Senate Bill 840, know that the dollars are there, and have this division really get going. So I really have to thank the leadership in the Senate for doing such a great job helping me get that set up.
Do you have any other legislation plan that involve Alzheimer's or older Pennsylvanians that you have coming up?
Yeah, we have a few things that are on the burner as far as drafting. Some of it has to do with property tax relief for seniors, things that are very important to people in my district. But as far as, you know, the healthcare piece, we do have some other things, but I'll leave those for next session. We only have about 12 days left in, actually less than 12 days now in session, so they'll probably be proposed early in January.
Senator Rosemary Brown, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That concludes today's show. A reminder, we want you to meet the candidates whose names appear on the ballot in November. Our series of interviews features the hopefuls running for U.S. Senate, Congress, and state row offices. It all gets started Wednesdays at 7 p.m. To find out who's being featured in the offices they're running for, visit PCN Select or PCNTV.com. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.